Hello and welcome to Fail Forward, a series of videos all about the bits of games which don't quite work and why. This quite spoilery episode is all about Wolfenstein The New Order, Machine Games' attempt to bring the long-lived first-person shooter series up to date, or up to 1960 at least, which is when it's set, envisaging an alternate reality in which the Nazis won the war with the benefit of occult power and ancient technology. As in previous Wolfenstein games, you play as BJ Blazkowicz, sentient jawline with a penchant for dog food and a profound hatred of the Third Reich. Alas, a piece of shrapnel to the brain has left him catatonic for a couple of decades, and he's roused back to full consciousness only to discover the war has long since been lost. What does he do? He kills Nazis, of course, and lots of them, and they're stupid Nazi dogs too. But the New Order isn't about mindless carnage. Well, okay, maybe it is just a little bit. But as well as mindless carnage, there's an awful lot of mindful carnage too, fitting out our chum Blasco with stealth accoutrements and sending him off to shiv Herr Commandant before he can call for reinforcements. And even when a less discreet approach is required, many and various are the affordances for chaos, rewarding spatial awareness and improvisation as Blasco shifts tactical gears to deal with each new threat. It's really one of the best shooters there have been in years, and extraordinarily paced, with its fluid switches between tense stealth and explosive mayhem, and with an expert eye for the way environments define action, contracting and expanding in each section, funneling the player, then letting the player roam. These settings too are drawn with ridiculous detail, and lit and shot with a cinematic flair few other developers have matched. It's a rare game in which the cutscenes are worth watching, not for what happens in them, but for how it's shot. Look at the way the camera moves and cuts here. Few movies are as eloquent with their presentation of a simple scene of dialogue. Look at the lighting too. Throughout, Machine Games deploy brilliant light sources which bleed through mist or dust or fog, giving their spaces a powerful sense of volume and atmosphere. And look at these doors. Oh god, the doors. Those filthy, sexy doors. I really love the New Order then, and I like it all the more for something that, on paper, it gets completely wrong. The New Order is one deeply strange game. Its tone is completely all over the place. On the one hand, there's its absurd ultraviolence, which is often tinged with a gleeful dark comedy, and in this way I think it's quite consciously taking the sort of pop cultural revenge against the Nazis that Tarantino attempts in Inglourious Bastards. But it evokes B-movie schlock too in its occultism and coy retrofuturism. This is, after all, a game in which you fight robot dogs, and giant mechs, and moon Nazis.
I'm on the motherfucking moon.
The mouse on this one.
Yet, with the other hand, Machine Games is dosing you with apparently earnest emotions. Among the many upgrades they bestow upon Blazkowicz, along with his ability to dual wield and simultaneously reload sniper rifles, the greatest gift appears to be a soul. It's not something I expected from the game, and yet Blasco's internal monologue is a frequent companion, and instead of Duke Nukem's sardonic quips, we get the melancholic, whispered reminiscences of a thoughtful man completely brutalised by war. At first it's easy to dismiss as some sort of parody, Blasco muttering hoarsely about the time he jumped in a well as a boy looking for his father's pocket watch, or recalling the long-lost languor of a summer's day barbecue. These things juxtapose quite sharply with overround violence, to say the least. And yet, the insistence of the game wears you down to accept them. Genuinely touching human moments, well written and well performed, intersperse the carnage. There's Blasco's relationship with Anya, which manages to draw a relationship of good humour and shared sadness and mutual respect in relatively little screen time.
And there's one more thing. It's quite critical.
What?
That'll be all. We can go now.
And I can't immediately think of another first-person shooter in which you collect lost toys and return them to a mentally disabled man. And then of course there's Blasco's sad blue eyes staring at you from cutscenes. Look at them. Look at those eyes. How much more limpid could his eyes be? The answer is none. None more limpid. This is a game about shooting Nazis on the moon, and yet an unfailing earnestness about intimate human decency is written through it like the words in a stick of rock. It's completely bizarre, and yet I wonder if you stumble through these moments of genuine emotion in a state of pliant discombobulation, made more vulnerable to the game's tenderness by the continual expectation that it's going to be lampooned. But it never is. Somehow, the New Order lets these entirely contrasting elements sit flush together, and just hopes players resolve whatever dissonance results for themselves. I call this an interesting failure because I think the ultimate effect is pretty weird, but not actually bad. The author Edgar Allan Poe had a theory about how best to construct fiction, which he dubbed the unity of effect. Essentially, his notion was that you decide upon the overall intent of the poem or story, what the desired effect will be on the audience, and then build every other element to point in that direction so that every filament of the work confirms the same emotion. I'm coming round to the conclusion that this idea is a load of bollocks, and that you end up with stories in which the aesthetic tail wags the narrative dog, with the result that the palette of expression is vastly curtailed and in Poe's case invariably demands a lot of pretty women dying. The thing that first shook me out of this idea was Korean cinema. Watch the work of Park Chan-wook or Joon-ho Bong and you'll see narratives told with a complete disregard for genre. Bong's Memories of Murder is a grim tale about South Korea's first recorded serial killer, but it blends into its police procedural everything from horror to slapstick comedy. It contains the panoply of human experience. It isn't afraid to be multiple things, sometimes simultaneously. Park Chan-wook is best known for Oldboy, but I think his masterpiece is Thirst, a vampire movie with a similar fluidity, moving easily between gruesome drama and black comedy and romance. A man can puke blood while playing a wind instrument, and it can be both horrible and kind of funny. This is allowed. I think games pull off a similar trick, but for different reasons. They're composite things, made by multitudes and stitched together, and in their divergent elements we sometimes find stark and jarring dissonance. But sometimes we're able to compartmentalise these different experiences and enjoy each without need for holistic unity. And so it is that Wolfenstein is not only a cathartically silly shooter, but manages to be a sensitive interpersonal drama too. More curiously still, while presenting the Nazis as cartoon villains who wield mechs and cyberdogs, it also articulates the true horror of their ideology with total seriousness and sobriety. It never uses the suffering they inflict on people as a source for schlocky entertainment. The victims of Nazism are invariably tragic and, at their most exploitative representation, merely horrific. Only the Nazis themselves suffer for the audience's amusement, only their suffering is ever trivialised, and even then, Blasco mostly dispatches them with an efficiency that refuses to linger upon their pain. Sadism is for the bad guys. Well, mostly. It even engages directly, multiple times, with the very source of the Nazis' toxic ideology, eugenics, and deals with it in a way which artfully punctures the notion of Aryan racial supremacy. Or at least it does, up to a point. And a very odd point it is too. One of the things that puzzled me in the reaction to the New Order was a meme which compared the original pixelated Blazkowicz to the new high-poly Blazkowicz. It started out as a comparison in good faith, but was then co-opted as a means of complaining how little gaming had changed, a dig at the lack of diversity among heroes, I would guess. And while I'm on board with that idea in general, the chosen target here seems to be a mistake on every possible level. Firstly, the new high-poly Blazkowicz is a kind of incredible technological leap, limpid eyes and all. Secondly, you kinda have to expect that a series or remake might reasonably retain its protagonist. Thirdly, Blazkowicz proves to be more than a lunk of gristle holding a gun. And fourthly, the blonde, blue-eyed Hulk is deployed with a subversive brilliance. That he's repeatedly mistaken as a symbol of the Aryan Übermensch throughout the game is one of the ways the New Order so effectively demolishes the foundations of Nazism. In one absolutely riveting scene, albeit one which is in total awe of Tarantino, a principal Nazi villain intimidates Blazkowicz on a train carriage, supposedly testing him to see if he's racially impure, before revealing it all to be a sadistic play act.
Diese Bilder. Urlaubsfotos, alte Kriegsaufnahmen. Gar nichts. Davon abgesehen kann ich ein Nicht-Arier mit bloßem Auge erkennen. Du etwa nicht? Lassen Sie ihn gehen, Bernhard.
Given that Blazkowicz is not in fact a Nazi but vehemently opposes them, the meaning that players cannot help but take away is that the entire principle on which Nazism has rested its understanding of race and their own superiority is a complete nonsense. At every turn, Nazism is shown to be the hollow, self-serving hypocrisy which it is. The game goes so far as to reveal that much of the Nazis' power, based on ancient technologies that border on the occult, has been stolen from the Jews. This is, of course, a grand if rather unsubtle irony. The Nazis aren't themselves special in any way, their power derived by theft from the very people they persecute as lesser than them. If this seems to be a bit of a glib switcheroo, then it's somewhat mitigated by the game's relatively thoughtful attempts to place the pursuit of this technology in some sort of Jewish philosophical context.
So everything you have created, what were you planning on using all that stuff for?
You don't understand, Amelie. There was never any purpose or intent of use beyond the act of creation. We create to commune with God. Do you see that?
You've lost me.
It's like mathematical equations.
Go on, Madeline.
And each solved equation brings you closer to God.
But never intended to be used.
No, the act of creation itself is the intended use.
And yet, the great tragedy of Nazi persecution was that it scapegoated people, that it made completely unjust and unfounded accusations of inferiority, of moral decrepitude, of criminality and corruption. By making the Jews secretive hoarders of ancient technological power, to the extent that they have golden exoskeletons and occult weaponry, the game inadvertently reconfigures the atrocity of their persecution. It's to say that the Nazis persecuted them not out of a disingenuous, cruel and easily discredited belief in Jewish inferiority, but because they saw them, apparently accurately, as a threat to their own power. By trying to find ever greater means to expose the fraudulence of Nazism, the game ultimately misrepresents the true extent of their cruelty. But the game takes care to do much else besides. Through letters and leaflets you find, describing the regime's malice in ways which make the overall impression of this hugely violent game one of actual humanity and compassion. You couldn't come away from the game without seeing Nazi ideology as emetically, unfoundedly arrogant, cruel, and most of all, dumb as a sack of Aryan potatoes. And then it lets you kick that sack of potatoes all over the place. And as gratuitous as its violence may be, perhaps that's exactly what such a squalid part of human history deserves. To be obliterated forever, over and over, by dual-wielded pop-cultural shotguns, along with their stupid Nazi dogs too.